Chapter 8. Blaine. Blaine sighed blissfully in the Epsom salt bath. After a long day of meetings, video review, weights, and finally practice, his muscles were tired, and Epsom salts always made him feel better. He was no longer sure if the effect was physical or purely psychological from having done it so long, but he didn't care as long as the tension left his shoulders. The alarm he'd set blared beside him, earning a groan from his lips. He'd promised to meet up with Kenzi to look over ideas tonight, and while he didn't mind seeing Kenzi again, he didn't really care what she did with the cabin. Once that cabin had held fond memories of summers at the lake, weeks when his parents weren't working and they relaxed as well. But that had been before the accident, before his world turned upside down. Now he hated the place. He wished his uncle had sold it long ago so he didn't have to walk down memory lane to do it himself. He released a frustrated breath and pulled the plug. Another half hour would have been so nice, but maybe he could take another one after Kenzi left. He toweled off and pulled on his faded college t-shirt. It was too old and ratty to be seen in public, but he loved the comfort of it. It fit like not really like a glove. He knew that was the saying, but gloves had never fit his hands perfectly. His fingers had always been too long for most gloves. No, his shirt fit more like a perfectly worn-in pair of shoes. The kind that supported your foot in all the right areas. The kind that felt like you weren't wearing shoes at all. The doorbell rang as he zipped up his jeans, and he ran a hand through his wet hair as he walked to the entrance to let her in. Her eyes widened as he opened the door, and she took in his still damp appearance. "Oh, was this a bad time? I thought we said 7, but I can come back." Her face turned pink with her flustering, and Blaine bit back a smile. He'd never seen her look so uncomfortable. Normally, Kenzi appeared polished and sure of herself. "No, you're fine. I just got out of a soak, and I'm ready to see what you came up with." He hoped his words didn't sound as forced as they felt in his head. Honestly, if he could get paid to demolish the cabin, he would just do that. He stepped back to let her in. "Okay, if you're sure." Her eyes scanned the large room. He'd purchased the house when he first signed with the Tornadoes, but he hadn't done much with it since then, and he was sure her designer eyes were cringing at the lack of style. The room had matching furniture, but he hadn't gotten around to hanging anything on the walls yet. He wasn't even sure what he would want on them, nor had he painted any of them. They still had the bright white that houses tended to come with, so people could add their own style. His teammates all seemed to use designers, or had wives or girlfriends that took on their houses. He just hadn't gotten around to it. Way too much going on all the time for him to set aside brain space for it. "Wow, this is..." She paused, as if searching for the right word. "Big." Blaine couldn't help the chuckle that escaped his lips. "Yeah, I guess it is. And blank. One of these days I should do something with it." He saw the spark in her eyes, and he wished he could see the images that were clearly flashing through her head. "Shall we set up here in the living room or the dining room?" She looked toward the couch, and her lips twisted in an adorable tilt. "Let's do the dining room if you have a table there. It might make it easier to see." Some sort of portfolio book filled her arms, and a laptop bag hung off her shoulder. He led the way through the living room and into the slightly smaller, but no better decorated dining room. A large table that could seat 10 took up most of the room. Blaine wasn't even sure why he had a table so large. He never had that many people over. Perhaps he should invite his teammates over more often. He certainly had the room to entertain them. Kenzi set her laptop down on the table and opened the portfolio book, revealing paint chips and drawings and samples of fabrics. "Now, keep in mind, you and this place are my guinea pig projects, so I need your feedback, okay? I don't have computer programs for everything yet, so I did a lot of the drawings by hand, but I brought my laptop so I could show you pictures of furniture and rugs if my drawings weren't enough." The first sketch was of the master bedroom, and it was perfect. "Kenzi, this is amazing." She had found a way to bring life into the room without changing everything about it. I haven't even shown you everything yet. If you think this is gorgeous, wait until you see the other rooms." She laid out the next board, and his jaw dropped. "Here's the living room currently," she said, pointing at a picture she had taken of it. "And here's what I'd like to do." Blaine stared at the images. The worn couches were replaced with new brown leather ones. A masculine but romantic theme ran through the room, with horns on the walls but candles placed on the mantel and the tables. Reds, blues, and browns were brought to life from the run in the center of the room, and throw pillows on the couches. It looked comfortable but sophisticated, like it was meant to be lived in and enjoyed. He could almost see himself there, with family and friends, teammates and kids. It gave him a sinking feeling. No kids. And while he was at it, maybe no one else either. Just a good-looking place for someone to enjoy, because he certainly couldn't. Not after what happened there. He was overwhelmed. She ran him through the design. He touched the fabric swatches and took in the feelings that came with the changes she suggested. She was amazing. Even the way she talked was so soothing. Wow, that's pretty amazing. He knew it was the same room, the one where he'd played card games with his brother, where the two of them used to sit and read comic books, but it looked so different with Kenzi's touch. So different, in fact, that he wondered if perhaps he could spend time there again. When she turned to him, he was surprised to see insecurity in her eyes. "You like it? Really?" She looked so worried that he placed his hand on her arm out of reflex. He knew he shouldn't. He'd felt the jolt the last time he touched her hand, but he wanted to reassure her. He didn't want to be the cause of her doubt. "Really, it's great." The jolt was there again, humming beneath his fingers on her skin. What was it about Kenzi that affected him so? Normally, he was able to turn off any feelings he might have for the women he dated, but something about her kept his defenses down. But could he really take a chance with her? No, he shouldn't. He shouldn't pull her into his messy life. It wasn't fair to her. Her eyes held his for a moment. "Good. Well, let me show you the rest." She dragged her eyes back to the portfolio and flipped another board. The two smaller bedrooms appeared and were similar in color and style to the master bedroom. His heart seized at the sight of the rooms he used to spend so much time in. Could he really sell the cabin? And finally, the kitchen. She turned the board over, and he marveled at how she'd even managed to work the colors into the small kitchen. "I think we should replace the countertops, along with the fridge and the stove, but the original cabinets are beautiful, so I just want to sand and refinish them." He could barely believe it was the same kitchen. The yellowish countertop had been replaced with a beige and brown flecked marble that looked clean and somehow made the room appear bigger. "I always hated that countertop," he said with a slight chuckle. "Can't say I was a big fan either." She joined in with a smile and then caught his eyes again. Their laughter faded as the connection between them pulsed invisibly in the air. He wanted to kiss her, to see if her lips felt as soft as he thought they must, but that was madness. He opened his mouth to commend her, but instead he bit down on his lip, looking too long at her mouth before she fidgeted in her seat, and he looked at her eyes, feeling the heat. Too hot, too close. "Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" Shock registered on her face, followed by surprise, and then indecision. She probably knew of his aversion to dating and didn't want to get involved with that. Or perhaps she thought him a womanizer who went through women like socks. He knew there had been a few rumors floating around of that variety. Or maybe she just didn't date clients. Whatever the reason, he wished more than anything he could take the words back, but they hung in the air, suspended by tiny threads as they waited for her to answer. "I'd like that." They were only 3 words, 3 little words that could mean anything on a normal day, but coming from her mouth in answer to his question, he knew that they were going to change his life, possibly forever. Kenzi. She'd like that? What had she been thinking? Yes, she found him attractive, but getting all flustered and distracted by his pretty eyes wasn't smart. being attracted to him after accepting the job wasn't smart either. Plus, what about his reputation? Did she really want to be just one of the women he went out with a few times before moving on to something else? No, she didn't. She craved commitment, and she didn't feel he was ready for that. But it was too late now. Backing out now would be rude, and as she'd just secured payment for the job, it would be too uncomfortable. With a sigh, Kenzi set her portfolio and laptop down on the passenger side and slid into the driver's seat of her car. She meant to go home, but she wasn't really surprised when her car pulled into Shelby's apartment complex instead. Kenzi parked and bit the inside of her lip. Darkness had fallen while she'd been in Blaine's house, but it wasn't that late. Surely Shelby would still be awake. Just to be safe, though, Kenzi shot her a text as she walked up the walkway that led to her apartment. The reply that she was always welcome came just as Kenzi reached the door. She knocked, expecting the look of surprise that covered Shelby's face when she opened the door. "I was in the neighborhood," Kenzi said with a shrug. Shelby smiled and pulled her inside. "So, what's going on?" she asked as they sat on the couch. Kenzi sighed and dropped her head into her hands. "It's Blaine. I went over there tonight to show him the plans." "And?" Excitement filled Shelby's voice. "And he loved it." "That's great. Why are you acting like that's not great?" Kenzi lifted her head to stare at her friend. "It is great. I mean, he actually relaxed, which was amazing. And he looked like he enjoyed my work." "As he should," Shelby said, interrupting her. "Yeah, but then we had this weird moment." Shelby's smile didn't fade as Kenzi had expected it would. Instead, one of her eyebrows lifted as she asked, "What kind of weird moment?" "Like a moment where he touched my arm like this?" She demonstrated the motion, trying to have the same intense expression on her face that Blaine had, the one that made her squirm. "Oh, that is something," Shelby said, fanning herself. "I know!" Kenzi threw herself back on the cushions of the couch and covered her face with her hands. "And then he asked me out." She moved her fingers slightly to view her friend's reaction. Shelby's eyes widened. "What?" A mischievous smile tugged at her lips. Kenzi squeezed her eyes shut behind her hands and grimaced. "And I said yes." She lowered her hands and opened her eyes, expecting to see shock or dismay on Shelby's face, but she was grinning like a loon and staring expectantly at her. "Okay, so what's the big deal?" "The big deal is now he's my boss. What if it goes badly? What if it gets awkward? What if he forgets about me like he does all the other women he's seen? How am I supposed to keep working for him if that happens?" How could Shelby not see what a huge mistake this was? Shelby placed a calming hand on Kenzi's arm and tilted her head down in the motherly gesture she had perfected. "Okay, first of all, you don't know why he doesn't see those women again. Maybe he goes out with them and realizes they aren't compatible. Second, what if it doesn't?" "What?" "What if it doesn't go badly? What if it doesn't get awkward? What if it actually works out? What if he didn't date those other women more than once or twice because they weren't the woman for him? What if it turns out God sent him into your life for a reason, and you realize the two of you are perfect for each other?" Kenzi both loved and hated this trait of Shelby's. On one hand, she'd wanted her friend to commiserate with her, to tell her how awful this was going to be. After all, misery loves company. But on the other hand, Shelby was right. Maybe Blaine offering her this job had been at God's prompting, though she didn't know if he were a believer or not. And maybe him asking her out had been the same. He'd certainly looked shocked when the words left his mouth, as if he hadn't planned them, but they had burst forth spontaneously. If that was the case, then maybe he could be attracted to her. "Okay, maybe you're right." Shelby rolled her eyes. "Of course I'm right. Besides, it's my turn to be the calming influence, especially after you helped me so much last year." Kenzi chuckled. Shelby was usually the calming influence, but the stress of finances and the lack of a donor during the Christmas season last year had sent Shelby spinning much the same way Kenzi was now, and Kenzi had been the voice of reason then. "So, when are you going out with him?" "Tomorrow night after he finishes practice." Kenzi tried not to let the excitement she felt flood her voice. It was one thing to feel it inside, but if she let it out, then it might take control of her, and she couldn't let that happen.